LUAN Emotional Podcast, conversations for inspiration on the go. We offer on-the-go inspiration because our whole heart is set on beauty and our best bets are set on art. Hi, Michael. How are you? Welcome to LUAN Emotional Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marion. It's a pleasure to be here.
So this amazing person that I have in front of me, Michael Smith, he's a speaker, a facilitator, an entrepreneur, and founder of Orquestando. He has more than 25 years of experience as a speaker, 18 years as a consultant. He's co-author of the book Orchestrating, Empowering Understanding and Patience in Your Organization. He is also known for his talent in orchestrating companies, people, and organizations internationally. More than 50 international congresses and more than 400,500 people have been to orchestrated around the world. He has several studies with multidisciplinary backgrounds such as entrepreneurial architecture, complexity science, accelerated learning, human development, organizational culture, coaching, transpersonal psychology, music, meditation, and many more. So we have this amazing combination between, arts, emotional development, and science, which makes, which makes these themes very enriching. So one of the main topics that we can see today that are happening around the world is confusion and having kind of like this difficulty of being able to make decisions or not having clarity, right? So it's very easy to talk about clarity, but maybe it's very difficult to implement clarity. And nowadays, with all the international things that are happening, the way that humanity is going, and all of the information that we have around the world, it makes it very easy to access our clarity. How do you get clarity?
Well, thank you. And I think usually the first thing we want to do, I think my personal experience is that you're confused. To realize that you're confused, then you want to, figure out that you need clarity. Because confusion it becomes a state. So you have a state of clarity, you have a state of confusion, and then you're like, okay, when you live in the state of confusion, you're trying to figure it out, but from a perspective of confusion. And what does that mean? Like it's happened to all of us with the pandemic. I remember I was still trying to solve my problems from the mindset of the world, the way things, my life, the way it was before my new situation. I was still confused. I was still using my state of confusion to try to create something new. And clarity is about asking questions. And usually you start off by, hopefully you start off by having somebody to talk to, hey, so what's going on? What's happening? And give me some clarity. And that's one of the few ways we start trying to find out. People's opinions, they become information, and you compare it to yours. It's not when you have something that's, because you have clarity, then you have certainty. And one thing is clarity and another thing is certainty. So when you have clarity, you to get to clarity, you ask questions. Certainty, it's there and it's fixed. And that was my situation, and that was one of the strongest points of learning that I had back in 2020 is that make sure you change your questions. If you want to change, your questions have to come from a place where you're not at, because you'll keep on repeating yourself.
Yeah. Like Einstein's quote, right? It's like, if you want to solve a problem, you need to solve it with a different mindset than with the mindset that you created it with, right?
Exactly. Yes.
You mentioned something really interesting, that sometimes, we get confusion because we integrate other people's needs and wants with our own needs and wants, and that makes very difficult to kind of like separate them or identify what is it like the culture is asking for me, or what is it what maybe my close circle is asking about me. For example, I don't know, your family, maybe your parents or your kids, right? Instead of being in touch with your soul and with your essence and finding that clarity through you, but we mix between the things that we think we want with what maybe other people or our own culture want from us.
Yes. Usually it happened a lot to me when I would live in a country that it wasn't my country. I remember feeling like I had the license to have permission to be free because I didn't have to be what that culture expected. So I could just, flow a lot easier. And yes, this is very, it's a huge subject because, with your partner, unless you have very strong clarity on what's allowed or what's not allowed for your child, you assume when you get together, you have a certain amount of things you're together for. You're for the reasons, the special and even important reasons. But then maybe you didn't talk about, I don't know, I'll tell you the truth about video games. How much time do you allow your child to? And maybe, the person has expectations, and you have to know that it's not clear. You have to create clarity with other people, but you have to do it with yourself too. And clarity is just it's a state of being. It's a state of questioning. It's a state of finding out. It's just a state of always looking. Always looking, and this clarity that. What I like about the idea of clarity is that it starts impulsing other things, and we'll get into this conversation, but like when you have clarity of the certain basics in your life for survival, okay, you have clarity that you can have those, that you have those covered, that you're clear. And there's even a saying where you say, we're clear. For your basics. Then you could go into and join. There's a system called spiral dynamics. You start off with what's your basic survival needs. Then what are those things when you start having time to enjoy? Because when you're in survival, you don't even have time. You don't even have a sense of flavor or seeing the stars because you're too in confusion trying to survive.
Totally. And I heard this quote a while ago that said that first you need to survive for then to be able to create. And sometimes we're living our everyday life surviving and surviving and surviving, and you have kind of like the triggered stress response, and it's not allowing you either to think about clarity or creativity or curiosity, because you're focused on getting the ends met in that specific situation, whether it could be health wise, economically, I don't know, any situation that you're living in. You mentioned something interesting about that clarity is about always looking. So with clarity, for example, it's about kind of like becoming a seeker of clarity all the time, constantly. But sometimes the more we found out about things, sometimes it happens that the less we know. How are these two related?
The more you find out, the less we know. Well, it's also vast. When you start seeing things clearly, you start seeing the connections and the relationships. This is some of the things that I consider very important. When you seek, you don't just seek. Well, you can. There's where it depends on how depth you go into clarity. You're looking for clarity to accomplish something, to find out something, to do something. And so, yes, once you start seeing, you unveiling to have clarity, start cleaning up the place. Whoa, I didn't know I had all this mess. Or I didn't know that what I was doing here was affecting this. And I always use, I learned from one of my mentors with the word was just enough. Because yes, the idea is not to go crazy. Because if I tell you, give me a clear response about something on the internet, you'll find 1,000 answers. And so yes, just enough is very important. And having, like we were talking about, the survival, having enough to know where your survival state, and talking about survival state, there's a lot of people, and this happens a lot when I've worked with a lot of times with companies where the owner is not in a economical survival state, but he still thinks he's in where he used to start the business and they had no income. Mm-hmm. They still act that way, even though years have passed of prosperity, mm-hmm. and they can make their place less stressful. No, they're still in survival state. So getting clarity of what to release, what's no longer necessary, getting clarity of what to delegate. Right now we talked about that, I remember this, because I live in the country, and but I still go through, I find myself in states of stress, and I'm in a perfectly peaceful, beautiful place. Doesn't matter. It's about, remembering. And this is something very important, I think, is this is what I do with clarity. I make it visual. Mm-hmm. I put it on frameworks that allow you to create those relationships I mentioned. Mm-hmm. And for you to be able to come back at it and look at it, and anytime you need to, and even when you think you don't need to, you go back to it. You start, oh yeah, I have this. I can do this now. I forgot about it. I did it the other day. Somebody said, oh, I forgot I studied karate about 20 years ago, and they were almost a black belt, but they forgot about it, and now the person says, okay, I could retake it. My body knows it. I don't know. There's so many things that if we don't have a way of sustaining your clarity, because we can have great conversations, and we're, like right now we're having a great conversation, and we're using the video recording of this that will allow us to come back to regain the wisdom that comes out of our conversation, of our connections, of our questioning, and that will sustain this memory. Yeah. But a lot of times you're not going to put on a video. What's that? You usually need something to put it there, and like, okay, what are these connections can I do? Yeah. What is the situation I'm really going through? Things like that.
Totally. And like, does clarity all the time is kind of like constant, or it comes and goes? Because I wonder that if we're constantly evolving, right? If we're constantly changing, if we're all going through changes either biologically, right? So every 7 years, our cells in our body are changing. And, at least every month in our life, we have, different things going on in our lives. It's either like new things, new projects, new everything, right? So if we're constantly changing and constantly evolving, does clarity stays the same, or clarity also has its own cycles?
I think the clarity is a state of perception, of realization, of understanding. And I do think that the world is always changing. Mm-hmm. I do think there's a certain amount of your life that can be considered, this is what I know to be certain. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to be clear about that certainty is very powerful. Mm-hmm. And to be clear of the uncertainties, mm-hmm. is very powerful too. Mm-hmm. And some of the things I like to investigate is, what are those uncertainties you're not prepared for? Like, one of the questions I usually do, and I would ask, if you're listening, I would ask you to ask yourself, do you have a fire extinguisher in your kitchen right now? Mm-hmm. Is it there?
Yeah.
If it's not, you become blindsided. You become blind to the possibility, and if you think it's not possible, well, humbleness will help you, or hopefully not a fire. And so that's when I'm talking about clarity of, okay, you have clarity of what's certain, but clarity also about, hey, What are you not prepared for?
Yeah.
Okay, what are the things I need to do to get prepared for that? And those questions will, there's 1,000 questions you can make. But yeah, so I think clarity is a renewing everyday situation. That's why I think there's certain frameworks that help you keep yourself healthy in the sense of not going crazy. Because there's clarity. Your clarity today from two months ago is going to change up to a certain amount, and the government's clarity is going to change, and the countries and the world situations are changing. We've lived this in the last, and now it's almost become easy to intake, because creating clarity equates to question and to actually, okay, now I'm clear that my mindset from that I've been using in the last 10 years is no longer easy to flow with that if I'm a teacher, for example. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Becoming clear of that will allow you, okay, how do I flow? And how do I question? What are my mindsets that are keeping me stuck, for example? So clarity can be applied to so many different ways, everywhere from how much money do you have to how much openness do you have to change your point of view about something that maybe 30 years ago you were like, no way.
Totally. What about clarity in decisions? How can we get more clarity when we're faced with decisions or with dilemmas? Because most of the times we get this kind of like paralysis analysis, because things are not black or white, right? So the dilemmas, that's exactly why they're called dilemmas, right? And like the most famous dilemma, the dilemma of, Haynes, is about this person that arrives to the pharmacy and robs some medicine that his wife that's sick needs, right? So is it okay for him to do that, to rob in the pharmacy or not, because his wife needs it, no? And then it opens all of these, discussion. But most of the times, most of the decisions that we're faced with are kind of like gray tinted. It's not like black or white, like did he do good or not, right? How can we arrive to that sense of clarity? Does it have to do with priorities? Does it have to do with thinking about the individual versus the collective, or the collective versus the individual? Or what would you say has to do with that?
What it has to do with? It has to do with everything. And the further you go to understand your relations and your connections to what the context of what's happening, the greater clarity of the impacts you can probably, these are probabilities you can probably face. And what you want to do when you want to create clarity for decision making is to be able to rehearse different future scenarios the best you can. And nothing's guaranteed, because like it's always changing, but you can create certainty, and that certainty can impulse the energy you need to take a decision, because if I tell you, just walk, is very different than I tell you walk to the store. You got a decision, you got your clarity of what's the reason. So when you're making a decision, to have clarity of your consequences, of what are the risks of not making that decision, what are the risks of making that decision, what are the opportunities that I get for making this decision? Usually you're making a decision between one or two things, or maybe several things. Even like moving a country 2 years ago, when I was working all live events, and I had already started my online understanding and taking courses of how to create online workshops and all that, but I had not started. And my business was not about that. And so my business, went 100% down. And I had to decide, money, rent. I was paying rent, and I have I had this piece of land, and I had to make a decision. Sell some stuff, sell the cars, sell as much, get all the money you can together, and build very simple cabins. And make that decision, and take your children, take the family there, it's different, making those decisions. What am I making decisions of? Yeah, the thickness of your wall, because I even got, because I got friends that had refugee tents, the tents that refugees use. They're nice, but the walls are not that, they're like thin. They're tent walls. And here, 3 in the morning, the winds, the cold, or maybe I can make them out of wood. And so I had to make several decisions involving what is the situation, because they said 40 days.
Mm-hmm.
And yesterday, the 27th, I think, I started building, and what took 2 months and 3 days, 3 small cabins. But before that, I found out, trying to get clarity, is I called a friend of mine who's a political consultant. He has to have clarity. He has to be 3 steps ahead of his clients. And he told me, listen, it's not 40 days. It's not a 40-day quarantine. It's not that. It's 2 to 3 years. Get everything you can. And go for it. And that gave me clarity. That gave me power to make a decision.
Mm.
So yes, decision making is very important. Now, what happens when somebody goes and puts a store somewhere? Have you seen people put a store and it doesn't work in that place, and they close it, and somebody else goes and puts stores and it doesn't work, and somebody else? It seems like these people just pass by there and never realize that they never had businesses. The people that had, that they're in the past, so they didn't really take the time to get clear. Is this a good place? Is this a good place for my business? Is this a good place? Can they park? Can they see me? And you see those places in the city somewhere, and they always, they're always changing. But no, it seems like people don't take time to decide on what's convenient, what's really convenient.
Mm-hmm. I remember these quotes that I like a lot about that says there's no favorable wind for the one that doesn't know where he or she's going, right? So you can be drifting around in the sea, getting different kinds of winds. No, if you go to the east, if you go to the north, if you go to the south, right? And eventually, you will never know if it's favorable for you or not if you don't have your objective, if you don't know where you're going. No, and I want to ask you, Sam, how can we get the clarity to recognize when we are on our own path and not in someone else's dream?
I like your quotes, by the way. They're great. And your examples. And this question is great. A lot of this started, I started understanding this. I went to an event back in 2004 in Miami. And there was it was Wayne Dyer. Mm-hmm. And he was introducing Esther Hicks. Mm-hmm. And it was very interesting when I started understanding the work of Esther Hicks, of realizing when you're connected to yourself, mm-hmm. To what is your essence, and when you're not. Mm-hmm. And a lot of this is a physical sense. Mm-hmm. It feels good or doesn't feel good, But a lot of times when when you're kidding yourself, when you have a mask on, it's hard to see, it's hard to feel when you're not on your path. And I would say a large percent of humanity, and it could be things from their grandfather's path, they're their parents' path, they're living their parents' dreams, but they're not connected to theirs. And how many educational organizations really focus, there's new ones now, but most of them don't focus on helping you feel like you can have a dream, a great dream. And unless you pay a good amount of money, and there are people that are looking to get an education that's out of the system, that a system that created you to follow other people's dreams, you're going to get you won't, you'll get negative feedback about trying to be different. For example, trying to be different for your family. There's the black sheep of the family.
Totally. The world is not aligned to helping you find your purpose, right? Your reason to be. On the contrary, it's about, if there's anything, no, I think that, our culture around us, or these kind of like family systems. And I know it's about, sometimes our parents do it because of protection of ourselves, right? Like, giving the advice that they would give themselves, but, times have changed and everything. And sometimes they want you to be a lawyer because they were a lawyer, no? As simple as that. And they do it maybe with the best intentions. But I think it's like, instead of like when we're young, like, trying to see where are the aspects where we are more in flow at, right? Where are the places that we are aligned with our essence, with our purpose, that we are aligned with more or less kind of like the reason that we came here to be, right? I think there will be, if we created this world, we would have way less anxiety than we have right now, because people would be aligned to something that fulfills them, that nurtures them in the long term, not only on the short term.
It's definitely something that every person has to make a decision, and some people take 10 years to figure out that they were not connected, and some people take a lifetime, 60 years or no deathbed, but or never figure it out. Never realize that they never really connected to live their life or their potential or meant to be. And there's a lot of it's like what I like what you're doing, and the programs you have in LUAN, because your art in the way that it channels your expression. You're going to express who you are, and then you can recognize yourself through art. And a lot of times, if people burn out, it's because they're not connected. And those are one of the things to when you have clarity of yourself, and that has to do with nutrition too, because nutrition will make you fuzzy, cloudy. Not clear, and not only mentally, emotionally, and physically.
Like bad nutrition, right?
Yes, or and of course, bad nutrition. Nutrition is not easy digestible. It doesn't flow. It's not clear. It doesn't flow. It's not meant to be.
Of course, and also bad nutrition has a lot to do with declining the diversity of our gut, of our microbiome in our gut. And then when we don't eat healthy, right, we give access to these fungi and bacteria such as candida and other parasites that, for example, nowadays the latest research on candida, and candida is like almost every human being has it. The thing is, when it gets imbalanced, and it gets imbalanced with obviously foods with carbs and sugar and all of that, but candida has the same effects as Alzheimer's. The loss of memory, the loss of concentration, the loss of, being able to remember things, loss of, cognitive ability. And it's just this kind of like, fungi that we have in our gut. And, the amount of people around the world that would have a candida imbalance, I think it's huge. So we might not also, we need to have in mind the connection between the mind and the gut also for arriving clarity, right? If we have this temple, if we have this vehicle that we are living in everyday lives, we need to take care of it. Because if we forget about the relation of our gut with our brain, we might be experiencing many emotional, things related to that. For example, another thing really interesting is these biosis. It's like this gut imbalance that you have less good flora and bad of like parasites or like fungi and other things, right? And for example, these things damage a lot your self-esteem. It's quite interesting because nowadays we were having these conversations with other, I know, speakers on our podcast, and we were asking them, like, what are the most common pain of the patients that come to you? And people were answering us like these speakers: not feeling enough, lack of self-esteem. And it was crazy to find out that also lack of self-esteem has to do with the health of your gut. So thank you for mentioning nutrition, because I think it's crucial for clarity. It's such an important aspect.
And not only physically, but when you have when you're clear of when something's good for you, when something is not, and you follow what's good for you, you will have an impact, or a positive impact, on your self-esteem, because that's just self-love. Eating well is just about loving yourself, and it, I tell friends, it's not that I don't want that beautiful. I do eat sometimes chocolate cakes, and I do try to find out where it's made, and I do indulge. I give my permission, but once in a while, but it's not the most common thing I do. I usually stay away from what's not good for me, and I tell friends, it's not that my taste buds don't want that. My taste buds wants to eat that chocolate cake or that soft drink, but there's and which that joy, the pleasure is very strong. So many things that we can eat out there that give you great joy. And I understood one time, I don't want to get off the track, but one time I was like stressed and running, and I got these famous chips. I can't mention names, but they're a tube, and you open it, and I tasted it. Oh, I see how these work. They give you a huge amount of sensory pleasure and the taste buds, and so they're addictive. And I just, okay, good. And I just took that time. But the thing is that when you're clear of what you know, what's good for you, what's not, then you start exchanging that pleasure for health pleasure, the pleasure of feeling health. And it's like the test they do with the children when they put a marshmallow in the room, and they tell the kids, if you wait 15 more minutes, I'll give you 2. And they're how can you connect that state of pleasure for doing something what's good for you? And that comes with also what's good for you, what's your essence, being connected to yourself, being on your path, and having clarity of when I do these programs of with people, they're amazed of how much they've been doing for others, and how much they have stopped even in their work, let alone their personal life. But even at work, people get like sucked into people's wishes, people's thoughts of what's right. Fashion, culture, I think culture programs that help culture evolve, integrate, that's the very important thing to have that going on, because we're always changing. I have some friends that a friend of mine, she has her friend came over, and I was asking her, she has some tattoos, like very strong tattoos. When you have a tattoo on your forehead and another one on your neck, you're trying to get some information out there. You're trying to make it clear that you believe this, right? But it's not like right here where you want it for yourself. Most likely, I don't have a tattoo, but if I were to put a tattoo, it's going to be something that reminds me of something important. So, so I just asked her, what do you want to express? Oh, well, this, and she was very happy that I asked her, because most people she has it in very very strong places to put a tattoo, in the sense of communicating, and just making clear what's her thought, what's her feeling, and having clarity that most of her, what is that anger coming from, because it came from an anger. Okay, and understanding that she's dealing with that anger. Maybe 5 years will pass and she'll say, I want to erase that tattoo. Who knows? But if it's her story, she had to put it on there. She had to put it on her neck and one right here. And she had to do that. And being clear of that helps me not to judge. Mm-hmm. When I'm set on, and if I have in my certainty, I start putting values. So that's just where I think values don't work the way they use them at workplaces. Values work in life. Don't get me wrong. That I didn't mean to say that. I meant to say values. That when they say you should be this or you have to be this, these are your values. No, look at what you have and look at your priorities and how you deal with life, and that reveals what you value most. Right. But when if I had a value that, would respond negatively to that person's tattoo, mm-hmm. that's having a judgment. Mm-hmm. So clarity of what's, instead of why would you put a tattoo there? Mm-hmm. Hey, why? What does it say? What does that mean to you? Okay. That's all. I don't need to go into more because judgment is something very strong.
Totally. Yeah, and it reminded me of, like people might be asking, like, how do I know which things in my life do I have clarity or where could I start, for example, no? And I remember these message that a meditation teacher gave me one time that he told me, it's very important to watch your current state in your life, right? And there you would see where are your beliefs. If you want a partner and the partner is not getting there, it's because there's some restraining belief in that. If you want to be more successful in life or in work or in whatever it is, no, then you have a restraining belief there. So watch how is your life right now, and that will give you a lot of information on your beliefs about yourself, about what you deserve, about your worthiness. No? And I found that really interesting. And also another example to use, clarity in an easy to use way in our everyday life. This Brazilian rabbi called Nilton Bonder, he writes in one of his books about that if we want to know the things that we prioritize in life, it has to do between our hand and our pockets. And that's metaphorically, saying about where we spend our money. And over there is, it gives you a lot of information. Do we spend it on books and reading, on courses? Do we spend it on, maybe clothes for other people could see us, or clothes because we like to express ourselves? Do we spend it on trips? Right. And, different, traveling around different places, because what does, those trips give you? So if you kind of like make like a small chart, or you check your credit card statement, or you check whatever your bank account, whatever, right? You can really know what are the priorities in our lives. And sometimes we might find things about ourselves that we do that are different from what we think. And we need to arrive to that coherence between what we do, what we think, and what we feel. And I think that is like true clarity when these three are aligned. Obviously, it's a monumental work to arrive there, because sometimes we might be thinking, not like, for example, with nutrition, it happens a lot. Like, okay, I'm going to start eating healthy on Monday. And then Monday arrives and, you're not eating healthy, or other things. I'm going to start doing discipline. And it has to do sometimes, because when you analyze, one time I went to this workshop in the States by this guy, Tony Robbins. And it was quite interesting because you needed to do this exercise about what were your towards values. So the values that you want, and what are the move away values. And funny enough, when you did, that small chart, it was like, 10 of your towards values and 10 of your move away values where you drive your life. You realize that some of the towards values and the move away values contradicted each other. Wow. You know what I mean? So it was obviously very interesting to see where you kind of like your stepping stones or your obstacles were, because you did not have a clear path, because you want to do some things that are contradicting between each other. So obviously that's not going to get you very, very, very far, because then you would have, trouble of which ones do I need to prioritize? So the idea was first to be conscious of those move away values and your towards values. And then once that you see which ones were working in the same directions, then you needed to readdress in a different way the ones that were about, the ones that were contradicting with your with your goals in life. And I found that exercise quite practical for everyday life, because sometimes there are these move away values or these toward values that we have unconscious. We don't even have the clarity, right? If like all the clarity we would have it consciously, then it would be really easy and none of us would be confused or have, trouble making decisions. But most times or other times we have these unconscious needs and wants that we haven't even been mindful that they exist in us.
And those fuel, they give power to the limiting beliefs that you don't even know that you have them. You're like, hey, I have everything I need to do what I have to do, and I don't do it. Yeah. Tony is great, and he's devoted so many years to creating exercise to help clarity, and also when you start understanding what you spend on. Think about what you used to spend on maybe 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. What do you spend money on? What do you spend your time on? Mm-hmm. It's incredible to see your changes, mm-hmm. or what you haven't changed.
Totally.
Yeah.
Exactly. Another amazing example also by Nielsen Bonder that I like a lot is one is that about where do you spend your money, that actually tells you about your priorities in life. Another one about how you deal with emotions that has to do between your hand and your mouth. And that is, what reactions do you have or we have as human beings with the food, right? So that gives you a lot of information on which areas you're kind of like suppressing or you are not dealing with your emotions correctly, right? And you're being more reactive than responsive. So for example, if you have a strong deadline, maybe you overeat. And that's because you haven't digested, you haven't integrated the emotional imprint of feeling, these demands of yourself and this stress of, oh my God, I need to, give this presentation and I'm not ready and I feel like I'm an imposter and blah, blah, blah. So then you have, that rise of anxiety and then you eat, right? It happens the same thing with, for example, depression. So also if we observe our nutrition, if we observe where we tend to overeat, it gives us a lot of information on the emotions that we haven't integrated, that we haven't put enough attention to see them as guides and compasses of how our emotional state is being felt unconsciously.
Yes, and to acknowledge them, so you're clear that they're there. Okay, and you can't. When you try to reject something, then you're hiding it, and you can't hide really. We pretend to hide, and so and talking about clarity and nutrition, it's just think about having a clear intestine, having a clear stomach when things are not stuck. Literally, real life, like types of food or type whatever, and then you have the clarity, emotional clarity, or like when you start understanding how emotions or memory is stored in the muscles in the body, and so there's a lot of work we have to do, and you can go into depth, but I think one of the examples you mentioned very clear is what did I used to? What do you spend your money on? That will show you what do you value. Mm-hmm. That will show you have clarity on that. What do you spend your time on? When you have children, a lot of people, I remember in an event, they were talking about values, and I say, so what do you value the most? Because people, they talk about values, they just give them names like honesty and I don't know, discipline, and they said family, right? And I said to them, oh great, yeah, family. And how many of you have left your work on time at 5, and have you gone to really spend some precious time with your family? And nobody answered. Mm-hmm. And the CEO, this was a bank, uh, he put his hand up, and I said, "Let's start with you." And he was upset because he knew that he was creating a place where they talked about valuing the family, but there were a whole directors, all the group of directors were going through a lot of stress, a lot of separations, divorces, and people weren't happy because they really, the companies put these values up, and the people, they don't live them, and so not being clear about it. Hey, listen, come and work here. We don't value the family. We ask you to work 2-3 hours extra every day. Can you handle that? Yeah, I can handle it because my kids, they're old and gone. Okay, good. You're clear about it.
Yes.
So also one thing I'm looking at when I'm working with values, and one of the things that was very difficult when I've gone to organizations is that personally, a lot of ideas I get it from the way nature works. So nature is not saying that's a bad behavior, that's a good behavior. It doesn't do that, and it's just this adds or it brings to the benefit, or do we need to get rid of it? It's not good for us. If not, it's not something like, it's everything's out there, and there's good things and there's bad things. A plant will have a plague, and the tree will deal with it, or it'll die. If it needs to die, maybe it'll die. It'll take it on instead of taking it to other trees. It's just, when we have clarity of what it is, that is going to happen in this place or this job or this family, the idea is, are you brave enough to deal with a life of honesty? Can you, tell your employees the truth? And most people can. And when you're talking about you mentioned do, think, and act, and feel, and which has happened a lot in the world, and I've seen it having to being able to work with businesses, organizations, that the feel part is they try hard not to have to feel, because it would distract them. Because when you feel, you notice. When you feel, you can see if something's congruent or not, or is incongruent. And when most of these companies have such incongruency, they rather not feel. That's why they have everything with processes and everything. So I put it: feel, think, and do. When you don't feel, you're going to have some issues to deal with, because you're going to think and do, and you have no notion of the impacts, of no considerations. You're going to have some very traumatical situations going on with your employees and with your customers. A lot of like again, a bank, they're trying to sell all the credit cards because they're thinking how much I need to make. So they do it. They get a lot of promotions and they sign up a bunch of people, but then they have to recuperate the credit cards because nobody's paying back because they gave too many out. And they don't realize it by not feeling. They don't realize that doing that job of calling every customer and getting upset with them because they haven't paid their credit card helps them lose their reputation. So not feeling and staying so technically considered technical, like a business, will destroy a business. Imagine family, you and your couple, your spouse, not saying the things clear from the beginning. Most likely there's a lot of things you don't have clear from the beginning. And saying that clearly: hey, listen, I notice I have this addiction. I didn't know it. It's not that I hid it from you, but I have this addiction, for example. Or I don't like the things like them. I was saying yes because I wanted you to like me. Just, it sounds pretty mean or pretty bad, but if you say it, that clarity allows others to connect, because you connect through clarity. You know what I mean?
Totally. And clarity is how you connect through honesty as well. There's no clarity without honesty. And you mentioned a very important thing that I would like to pinpoint about. It requires a lot of courage to be honest. It requires a lot of courage to be authentic. And it requires a lot of courage to reach into our feelings. Because the easiest one is kind of like to go through life as we don't feel anything, as if we're not aware of our contradictions, if we're not aware about the things that we're doing in life. That could be the easy one. But it's kind of like having something knocking there, right? You can continue having your conversations and living your everyday life, and it's there. But once you arrive to those spaces of silence, then you can hear that it's constantly knocking on you and telling you, hey, this is not the job that I want. Hey, this is not the thing that I want in life, right? So, and sometimes I heard this quote that I liked a lot, that sometimes anxiety is a way of your soul communicating to you that it's not aligned to its purpose. And I love it.
Totally. And it reminds me of the places you go on vacation. I usually see that because of the organizations. A lot of times they take their employees to vacation spots, and sometimes it coincides with vacation times. And I see families run around, but basically they have these huge speakers with loud noise, a bunch of alcohol, and that's not a space where you'll stop and reflect upon life. It's not clear. There's too many things going on. Come and do this. Come and dance here. Come and play this. This is your aerobics instructor, and it's good, but it's not a place where you're going to be able to go into yourself. Yeah. So I think even places like that, like you said, it takes courage to sit down in silence. It takes courage, and it's not for everybody at the same time, but people usually get there some one moment or another. They get to that space. It's very interesting when you talk to people you think they never thought about these things, and because you think they're like very business type. No, everybody. When I learned in this, because maybe coming from a different point of view from life and all that, I used to think that I was very different, and there's a CEO, and me too. I'm doing the same thing, in a different way with a different clothing. And so it's really interesting to be able to have the courage and know that people have the courage, and you can help people have the courage. A lot of times just opening a door. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes life, kind of like shakes you up for you to get to those moments of honesty with yourself, right? Those moments where we suffer, where we, experience the death of someone close to us, where we experience, those life crises that we've all been through in different kinds, or like different traumas, right? They help us to reach to places that, unfortunately, it kind of like gives you this calling for healing. Not because you can't continue like that because you're suffering with the life that you're living. So if you want to change that, it's kind of like opening the door to an invitation to live a different life. And that would require kind of like a big jump, a very courageous jump into yourself.
Yes. Sometimes it seems like for certain people, it's not enough, something bad, something tragic, and they keep on going through repeating tragic things in their life. And yes, I think having clear of what feels good to you, having clear of what really ignites in yourself the energy to want to do, having clear, what do you count on? Who can you count on? Who do you don't count on? I think it's one of the things I do with my workshops is figure out who are those people that are not there for you to be connected to your essence, and understand it without going into I hate or I judge or whatever. No, okay, there's where. Now, what do I need to surround myself with? What are those things I can do, and where can I put my true energy? And there's where I think clarity is very powerful, and it helps you be honest. Actually, it helps you be honest. Transparency, clarity is transparency.
Totally. And I love this because this conversation today is this invitation to live life with more clarity, with more authenticity, right? So it's an invitation from LUAN Emotional Museum. It's an invitation from you, for all of us, for all of the brave souls out there that have this, fire inside, to be able to feel courageous enough, brave enough, because we already are, all of us, just to share that fire, to share that essence, to share that vision of your truest you, of your truest self. So thank you so much, Michael, for sharing all of this, your knowledge and your experience in all these years of work. Thank you so much for sharing your magic. And before we close, I would like to ask you a few questions. The idea is just to answer in one or a few words, just, try to keep it as short as possible. And the first answer that comes to mind, that's usually the best. Okay. What is art for you?
It's a good one. Is to learn to do the things well.
Who's your favorite author?
Thomas More.
An advice that changed your life.
One. I'll give you one real quick. I have to throw it. Focus on what you have.
The best quality in humans.
To let go.
A book that you recommend.
Original Self by Thomas More.
What feeds your soul?
Calmness.
The most pressing, or one of the most pressing issues for humanity.
Too much.
If humans can agree on this, you will be very happy.
Much less.
What would you like to scream to the whole world?
Smile and smile and keep on smiling.
Nice. And the last one, what is it that you have lived and that no one could miss experiencing?
Walking into nature and sitting down still like a statue, and actually having birds come up to you because they think you're a tree or something.
That is amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Michael. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for all your knowledge, and thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for everything you do, the way you do this, and the way you guide and the way you accompany this conversation. Love to do this one day with a tea in a live setting. So thank you so much.
Totally, I would love to. Thank you, Michael.
Want to keep the conversation going? LUAN, the world's first emotional museum, designed a global online experience to inspire and explore. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Telegram, and visit our site at luanmuseum.com to engage creatively.